Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a Ford F-150 Lightning DC fast charge deep dive analysis. I've had my F-150 Lightning now for about 3 months, and over that time I have pretty much charged it exclusively from DC fast chargers. Now there's two reasons for that. The first reason is the state of charge garage that we're in here today has undergone a complete renovation, and I've done that so I could provide better deep dive reviews of EV charging station content. Now in order to do this, I had to disconnect all of my circuits, so I didn't have a level 2 charging source at home. But honestly, the most important reason why I haven't been charging it at home or from any other level 2 source is because I wanted to compile a lot of data on DC fast charging with the Lightning. And that's why I've pretty much, every time I've plugged in the last 3 months, it's been at a DC fast charger and I've been recording it. So what we're going to do here today is first look at the complete 0 to 100% DC fast charging session and charging curve. But then we're going to take a look at 6 additional recordings that I've made that actually prove something that not many people have been talking about. And that's that the Ford F-150 Lightning charges differently than any other electric vehicle. Now, I don't mean that it has a different charging curve, because most electric vehicles, pretty much all electric vehicles, have different charging curves. I mean it charges differently. It has different charging characteristics than any other electric vehicle, which we're going to dive into, and I'm going to explain exactly what it does. And it actually is really good that Ford's employing this different charging strategy. But first, don't forget, please tap that subscribe button so you don't miss any upcoming content here on State of Charge. Okay, so before we jump into the DC fast charging analysis, I want to remind everyone, most Lightning owners and owners of all electric vehicles are going to charge at home most of the time, if they have the ability to charge at home. If you live in a big apartment complex or a condo where you can't charge, that's a different story. But most owners are going to be charging at home. And after all, home is not only the most convenient place to charge your EV, it's also the least expensive. I did a full deep dive cost to charge the Lightning video, and I'm going to put a link to that video in the description of this video for those that want to see the difference between what it costs to charge your Lightning at home versus at a DC fast charger or on any public charging infrastructure. I'm pointing that out now because charging at home requires either installing a 240 volt outlet like a NEMA 1450 outlet or hardwiring electric vehicle charging equipment. As you see on the wall behind me here, I have the new Ford Charge Station Pro here for my Lightning, which can deliver up to 80 amps of power. Now, when you have these charging stations or the outlets, like you see here, this is a NEMA 1450 outlet. When you have these installed, I urge my followers to hire a qualified licensed electrician to do so. It may be something that you're tempted to do yourself, but honestly, the downside is just too great. One little mistake and you can have a major problem on your hands. And when you're charging your electric vehicles, most of the time people charge overnight when they're sleeping, and that's the worst time where you want to have some kind of a problem. So as I said, please hire a qualified licensed electrician. I recommend the Qmerit network of electric vehicle charging station installers. They are a sponsor of this channel. I've worked with them for years, and they really do a good job at competitive prices, and they know electric vehicle charging equipment. It's what they do. They've installed thousands and thousands of electric vehicle chargers at people's homes, and they just know how to do it. They know all the special codes. They know exactly what wire is needed for each circuit. And you know that it's more complicated than you think because there's different types of wire. For instance, this Tesla wall charger here can deliver up to 48 amps. Now, most people will look online and say, okay, 48 amps, number 6 wire is good for that. But if you use number 6 Romex, it's not to code. You need to use a number 6 THHN or something in a metal jacket. It's not as easy as what you think is all I'm saying. So please hire a qualified licensed electrician to install your EV charging equipment. You could start with the link in the description of this video to my sponsor, Qmerit. They'll offer you a free, no hassle, no obligation estimate on what it costs to install your charging equipment. All right, so now let's take a look at the 0 to 100% charging session that I did. And I want to note, I did a few of these, but they were all so similar, I didn't really need to compare them. They all finished within a couple minutes of each other on a 350 kilowatt DC fast charger. When I did the same test on a 150 kilowatt DC fast charger, it took a little bit longer, not that much longer. We'll talk about that later in the video. But now let's take a quick look at the findings of my 0 to 100 on a 350 kilowatt Electrify America DC fast charger. After 1 minute, the Lightning is pulling 155 kilowatt. Now that's a maximum charging rate that Ford says the Lightning is capable of accepting. But wait, it keeps climbing, and after 5 minutes, we hit 160 kilowatt. Now I'm going to stop the video here to talk about this a little bit. Now these first 5.5 minutes are what I call the max power boost period. And that's when the Lightning accepts even more power than Ford says it can. It seems to only last somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes. I've done many recordings on this so far, and it's really depending on the battery's temperature when you plug in. The hotter the battery is, the shorter the charging time is at this max power boost period. And we're going to talk more about this later in the video. Okay, so now that the max power boost period is finished, the charging power makes an abrupt drop down to about 130 kilowatt and holds that for a couple of minutes. Now that's when things get a little weird. From here on, you see that the charging power dances rapidly up and down. It bounces from between about 120 kilowatt down to about 100 kilowatt, making it impossible for me to document the exact charging power. So what I do for the charging curve here is I look at the upper and lower limits of the numbers, and then I split it down the middle, and that's what I document. Now, from about 30% to 80% state of charge, the average charging power is somewhere between 112 and 115 kilowatt. So that's how I plot it out on the charging graph that you'll see later. Now, we reach 50% state of charge in 32 minutes, and the charging station has now dispensed 63 kilowatt hour. And for comparison, that's about the size of an entire Chevy Bolt EV's battery pack. It takes 39 minutes to reach 60% state of charge, and 4 minutes later, we're at 65% state of charge. Interestingly, Ford states it takes the Lightning 41 minutes to charge from 15% to 80%, and that's adding 65% state of charge. Well, we just added 65% state of charge in, you guessed it, 41 minutes. We reach 70% state of charge in 47 minutes and 80% in 54 minutes. I'm going to stop the video here again at 80% state of charge because you can see that the charging power is still greater than 100 kilowatt. But that's about to change big time. Now the charging rate stops dancing up and down, but the Lightning is now accepting only 59 kilowatt and slowly dropping. It takes 17 minutes to go from 80% state of charge to 90% state of charge. And that happens after 71 minutes of charging. Now all EVs slow their charging rates once the state of charge surpasses 80%, but Ford is being really conservative with the Lightning's charge rate over 80%. This is a huge 131 kilowatt hour battery pack, and it can probably accept more power from 80% to 90%. And quite honestly, I expect Ford to put out an OTA update to shorten that time. Now, after all, they have a history of doing that. When the Mustang Mach-E first launched, it too had a terribly slow charging rate, between 80% and 90%. And I even complained about it when I did my Mach-E DC fast charging video. But then Ford updated the Mach-E's charging curve with an OTA update, and it allowed it to charge faster from 80% to 90%. It takes 20 minutes to go from 90% to 95% state of charge. So if you do have a Lightning, you can see it's just not worth staying at a DC fast charger past 80 or 85% because the charging slows down so much. Now, honestly, until Ford improves the fast charging rate above 80%, you really should unplug at 80% and continue your trip, unless you really need the extra range to make your destination. If you're taking a really long road trip and covering, say, many hundreds of miles, the fastest way to do so would be to drive to a low state of charge and then charge until 80%. Unplug the vehicle, drive to the next DC fast charger, provided there's one along your route, and do the same thing. Now you'll notice here we reach 99% state of charge in exactly 2 hours. And then it takes another 23 minutes to balance off all of the cells and end the charging session. It took a total of 2 hours and 23 minutes, and the charging station dispensed 136.32 kilowatt hour. Okay, so it's not the best charging electric vehicle, but it's really not that bad. And one of the things I want to point out is my Lightning has the extended range battery pack. It's 131 kilowatt hours of usable energy. I already did a video on the standard range Pro Lightning's DC fast charging. I'm going to put a link to that video in the description of this video. The standard range has a 98 kilowatt hour battery pack and has a lower charging rate than what we can get with the extended range battery pack, which, as you saw, peaked at about 160 kilowatt. Now, the interesting thing is Ford says that the maximum charging rate for the extended range Lightning is 155 kilowatt. So we actually did better than what Ford promises as the maximum charge rate. Now, didn't hold it for long, but we did see it for a minute. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later on when we analyze some of the other charging events that I did coming up next in the video. But for here, the 0 to 100, it wasn't terrible. You know, in about a half an hour, you get 50% of your battery. So if you're on a long road trip and you just need to get that extra, 100, 125 miles or whatever, you only have to stay for about 30 minutes and you should be able to add that mileage back to the vehicle. So now we're going to take a look at that charging session that we just saw on paper. In my full charging curve, which is the charging power graph. And then we're going to take a look at the time to charge chart, which really explains how long it takes to add back miles when you're DC fast charging on a road trip. So here you can see the max power boost in the first 5 minutes of the charging session. Now we added 13 kilowatt hour here and brought the Lightning from 0 all the way up to 11% state of charge in about 5 minutes. And that's about 30 miles of driving at highway speed. So if you just need a quick boost to make it that extra 20 or 30 miles of your trip, you only have to stop for about 5 minutes. Then you can see where the charging rate dropped off to 130 kilowatt and held it for about 2 minutes. Before this period here, where the charging power continues to drop until it levels off at about 30% state of charge and basically holds the same rate all the way up to 80%. Now, during this whole time, the charging power was rapidly fluctuating up and down, and this line represents the midpoint of the extremes. Then we hit 80% state of charge, and the Lightning drops all the way down to 59 kilowatt and holds that for a few minutes before the steep decline all the way down to being 100% charged. I mentioned earlier that I expect Ford to improve the charging rate from 80% to 90% on the Lightning. And this is my estimate of what I think we'll see if and when Ford does so. Next up, let's take a look at the time to charge graph. Here we have the time in minutes on the x-axis and the state of charge on the y-axis. This graph is very useful to see how long it takes to add back driving range. I use two different metrics for this, the EPA range rating and also my 70 mile an hour highway range test. The Lightning and Lariat trim with extended range battery pack as I have is EPA range rated at 320 miles per charge. I was able to drive my Lightning 270 miles at a constant 70 miles an hour. So we'll use both the 320 mile EPA range rating and 270 miles as the full driving range in the equations here. I'll also note that I'm averaging about 320 miles in everyday local driving, so the EPA range figure is pretty close to what I'm seeing while driving on secondary and tertiary roads. Highway driving at higher speeds does reduce the driving range on the Lightning considerably because it's not a very aerodynamic vehicle. So when we use the EPA range rating, it takes us 18 minutes to replenish 100 miles of driving range. If we use my highway range test, which is likely more appropriate for long highway drives, it took us 4 minutes longer, and we did so at the 22-minute point. To add back 200 miles of driving range, when we use the EPA range rating, it takes 41 minutes, and on the highway, it takes an even 50 minutes. Next up, we're going to take a look at how many miles of range are added for every minute of charging. For do this, I break it up into 3 different categories: from 0 to 80% charge, from 80% to 90%, and from 90% to 100%. This is really meant to demonstrate just how much slower the F-150 Lightning charges once it reaches 80% state of charge. Again, we're going to use the EPA range rating and my 70-mile-an-hour highway range test. Okay, so from 0 to 80%, if we use the EPA range rating, we're averaging 4.63 miles of range added for every minute of charging. That's not bad. If we use my highway range test, we get 4 miles of range for every minute of charging added. Now take a look at what happens between 80% and 90%. That number drops down to 1.88 miles per minute using EPA, 1.59 miles per minute using my highway range test. Now we look at 90% to 100%. You don't even get half a mile a minute. If you go by the EPA range rating, it takes more time to charge from 90% to 100% when the vehicle shut off 72 minutes than it took us to charge from 0 all the way up to 90%, which was 71 minutes. So it just goes to show you how it just doesn't worth staying at a DC fast charger longer than 80% or 90%. In the case of the Lightning, probably 80% because it really slows up. So as you can see here, 90% to 100%, 0.45 mile for every minute of charging and 0.38 mile for every minute of charging if you use my highway range test. Hopefully Ford does improve the charging above 80%, say from 80% to 90%. We know it's going to be slow from 90% to 100%, but they could improve that, get it up to around 2.5 miles of range added for every minute from 80 to 90%. Then it would be a little bit better, and I could see staying until you get to 90% state of charge if you're at a DC fast charger and doing a long trip. But for now, you really have to unplug at 80% and move on because it just charges so slowly that it's just a waste of time to stay there and wait unless you absolutely need every single mile you can get. So that's the F-150 Lightning extended range battery pack's charging characteristics on a 350 kilowatt DC fast charger. But what if there aren't any 350 kilowatt chargers at the site you go to? What if there's only 150 kilowatt? Well, don't worry about it. It's not going to take that much longer. I actually did a full 0 to 100% charge recording on a 150 kilowatt station, and it only took 11 minutes longer. And that's for the whole 0 to 100. Most people are not going to be charging 0 to 100%. We only do that just to show the complete charging curve, not to tell people, oh, this is what you're going to be doing, because you're really not going to be doing that pretty much never. Most people are going to plug in at 10% or 20%, 30%, and probably charge to 80%, which is when the DC fast charging rate slows down dramatically. So what I did next, and what we're going to see here, is I recorded a bunch of DC fast charging sessions from 5% to 80%, from 15% to 80%, from 20% to 80%, 30%, 40%, and 50%. And I have them all on time-lapse recording now, showing how long each one took, because that's what most people are going to experience from a certain starting point up to 80%. And this is where I found out that the Lightning charges differently than any other electric vehicle I've ever tested. Now, most electric vehicles have a very high charging rate at a low state of charge. They begin, it ramps up, then it gradually goes down. Now, if you plug in at a higher state of charge, like 30%, 35%, you miss that entire peak maximum charging rate. I mean, an example is my Tesla Model 3, which I actually just recently sold, but I had for 3 years. It would pull 250 kilowatts, but only at a very low state of charge and for a very short period of time, only for a few minutes. Then it would begin the ramp down. Now, the Lightning has that. When you plug it in, you've got a high state of charge and then it ramps down. However, this is what it does differently than any other electric vehicle. Ford incorporates into the charging curve this, I'm calling it a max power boost, where as soon as you plug in, you get max power almost regardless of the state of charge that you plug in. Now, I haven't tested at really high state of charge, like 70% or so. I'm sure there's going to be a point above 50% where it's not going to give you this full power. But what happens, no matter when you plug in, you get for somewhere between 4.5 and 8 minutes this maximum charging boost that's actually higher than the maximum charging rate that Ford promises, which is 155 kilowatt. It actually pulls higher than that. So we're going to take a look at that now and see exactly what this looks like. It's really unique. I've never seen this on any other electric vehicle, and it's really good because, as I mentioned earlier, people aren't going to pull into charging stations at 0% state of charge like I do when I do these charge recordings. You might plug in along a route at 10%, 15%, 8%, 20%, anywhere in that range, and only need to charge up until, say, 80%. And no matter what state of charge you plug into, you're going to get this super high power delivery for a short period of time. And honestly, I think it's brilliant that Ford's doing this, because especially if you only need to plug in for a few minutes, no matter when you plug in, you're getting maximum power for a few minutes. You're not missing the max power because you're at a higher state of charge, which is awesome. So next we're going to take a look at these 6 charging sessions side by side, all up to 80%, but starting at different points. Then we're going to jump over to the charging power chart with the different charging curves, as well as the time to charge on all 6 of these recordings. It's really interesting. You don't want to miss this one because it's very unique and unlike any other charging graph that I've shown you before. All right, so here are the 6 charge recordings, all done on a 350 kilowatt DC fast charger. 5 to 80, 15 to 80, 20 to 80, 30 to 80, 40 to 80, and 50 to 80. They're all in that max power boost in the beginning, and they're starting to ramp down at this point. Now the 50 to 80 rips off pretty quickly and finishes up in only 19 minutes. The 40 to 80 would be next, as you would expect, and that reaches 80% state of charge in 26 minutes, 7 minutes later. 30 to 80% finishes up in 33 minutes. And look at 20 to 80, only 1 minute longer, 34 minutes. That was actually my best charging session of all these recordings. 15 to 80 finishes up in 38 minutes. Now that's better than what Ford promises. Ford says the Lightning will charge from 15% to 80% in 41 minutes. I've done other 15 to 80% recordings, and I'm usually at around 41, 42 minutes. This was a very good recording. And I get the 5 to 80% done in 50 minutes flat. Okay, so I know you really couldn't see much from those 6 videos side by side like that. But you know, you don't really get as much from the charge recordings as you do is when I put it on paper, which is what we're going to take a look at now. The full charging curve, the charging power graph, and the time to charge chart, where we're going to see exactly how quickly the Lightning recovers miles from different set points when you plug in. Okay, so this is what I meant when I said the Lightning charges like no other electric vehicle out there. Every time I plug in, it doesn't matter what the state of charge, you can see I get this max power boost for a short period, which is great for those that just need a quick boost to get to their destination. You won't see this on any other electric vehicle, at least not yet. All the other EVs follow their charging curve. There might be slight variation when you plug in. You might get a little extra power for a short period of time, but then they quickly resume along the normal charging curve. This is the only vehicle I've ever seen do this. Now the color coding is explained on the bottom, and I also included the 0 to 100% recording here just for comparison. You can see how the max kilowatt draw actually increases as the state of charge rises. That's because the Lightning continues to call for the maximum amperage that it can take in, but the pack voltage is rising along with the state of charge. The kilowatt draw is amperage times voltage, which is why you see the max power that it's taking in gradually rise across all 7 charging events. The 20 to 80% session was the best, followed by the 15 to 80%. I assume that was primarily because the battery pack temperature was ideal when I charged the vehicle those 2 days, and it allowed the Lightning to continue to charge at a higher rate for a slightly longer time. But I'm being really tedious here in saying that because the average person probably wouldn't even notice much of a difference, because across all these sessions, the charge rate is pretty consistent. There's always going to be slight variations from charging session to charging session, so don't look at these times as exactly what you'll expect. However, if the charging station can deliver the power the Lightning can accept, your charging time should be very similar to what you see here with warm temperatures. The Lightning, like all EVs, is going to charge slower in the winter when the battery is colder. How much slower, we don't know yet, but we're going to find out in a few months. And of course, I'm going to do some charge recordings and make a video on that. So let's look at the data here. You can see in all of the sessions, they have that max power boost in the beginning. Some last a little longer than other, particularly the 15 and 20% starts. Then they drop off and hold 130 kilowatt for a short time. The interesting thing is that in the 15 and 20% sessions, the vehicle held this second charging ledge, let's call it the 130 kilowatt session, a lot longer than the other charging sessions, which is why those were the two fastest charging sessions that we see here. Okay, so next up, let's take a look at the time to charge chart. As you can see, I have the 6 charging sessions up to 80% and the one that went to 100%. What you really want to see on this chart is a more vertical than horizontal climb. And obviously you see after 80% on the 0 to 100, it becomes really horizontal. And that's because the charging slowed down so much. But take a look at the 6 charging sessions up to 80%. They're not all parallel because some of the sessions charge a little bit quicker. Take a look at the yellow line. That's the 20 to 80%. That was the fastest charging session. You could see it has the most aggressive vertical climb. It almost catches the 30 to 80% session. It only finished a minute after the 30 to 80%, and it added 10 more percent. So it actually really outperformed the 30, 80% by a good amount. I mean, a good amount under our analyzing. As I said earlier, the average person probably would barely notice a difference, but that's what we're here for, to analyze the heck out of everything. You could see the 10 to the 15 to 80%, the 20 to 80%, and the 50 to 80% have the most aggressive climbs. Those are the 3 charging sessions that did the best, and the other 3 didn't perform quite as well. So now let's take a look at how many miles of range are added per minute in all of these sessions. Again, we're going to use the EPA rated range of 320 and my 70 mile an hour highway range test, which ended up with 270 miles driven. As you can see here, the 5 to 80% was actually the slowest. We returned 4.8 miles a minute on the EPA range rating and 4.05 miles per minute using my range test. The 15 to 80% did pretty good, 5.47 miles a minute and 4.62 miles a minute. The 20 to 80 was the best. We did 5.65 miles per minute according to EPA range rating, and then 4.76 miles per minute of charging with my range test being the metric we use. That was the fastest that the Lightning charged at. So, I don't need to read the rest of the numbers there. We actually covered the fastest and the slowest. And so basically what this points out is what you're going to get is somewhere between, 4.75, 4.8 miles of range per minute and 5.65, 5.7 miles per minute under the EPA range rating. If you're just driving on the highway, you're going to get somewhere between 4 miles of range per minute and close to 5 miles of range per minute, depending on when you plug in, depending on the temperature of the battery. Again, we have to repeat this test in the winter because these numbers are going to be lower. 4 to 5 miles of range added per minute of charging is certainly not class leading, but in my opinion, it is acceptable for long range road tripping. However, it's important to point out that this is without carrying a heavy load or pulling a trailer. The consumption rate's going to go way up on the Lightning when you do that. Now, the vehicle will charge just as quickly. It won't affect the charging, but you won't be able to go as far on a full battery or an 80% battery. So obviously these times are going to be much different as far as miles per minute if you're pulling a trailer or carrying a heavy load. Okay, so as you can see, the F-150 Lightning with the extended range battery pack isn't the best DC fast charging electric vehicle today, but honestly, it's not bad. And the fact that Ford has this unique charging structure, this max power boost, that almost whenever you plug it in, unless it's at a really high state of charge, you get this 5 to 6 minutes of max power, even more than what Ford promises, that really helps push those electrons in there and get some kilowatt hours in the pack really quickly, especially if you only need to add 20, 30, 40 miles. I mean, you could just plug in, you're there 10, 15 minutes, that's it, you're done, and you can move on. I mean, you don't always have to replenish the battery to drive another 200 or 300 miles. And as I mentioned earlier, most Lightning owners really are going to be charging at home most of the time and not using high-speed DC fast charge infrastructure. They only really do that when they're on long road trips. For home charging, they're going to be using a level 2 charging station like one of these guys here, or maybe even the Ford Charge Station Pro, which can deliver up to 80 amps. The Lightning with the extended range battery pack can accept about 19 kilowatts of power at home. This thing will charge the truck really quickly at home. I mean, honestly, faster than you need it to charge. I really have it set up here because I'm going to be doing a video on the installation. It's not hooked up yet. I need to upgrade my home's electric to add this 100 amp circuit for this here. So it's really just sitting on the wall right now. I've been charging my Lightning with a 40 amp level 2 charging station, and it charges it just fine. No matter how low the battery is, when I plug in the morning when I get in the truck, it's fully charged. So honestly, you know, level 2 charging at home, do you need this? You really don't. It's nice to have, and it will charge the vehicle faster. But you know, when you really need fast charging, that's when you go to a DC fast charger and pump those electrons in pretty quickly. And the Lightning does a relatively good job at it, mostly because it really holds that high charge rate, about 115 kilowatt, all the way up to 80%. Other EVs, sometimes that start out with a higher charging power, are down well below 100 kilowatt by the time they get to 80% state of charge. And the Lightning does a pretty good job with that. I like to see them hold a higher charging power between 80 and 90%, as I said earlier in the video, and I think they're going to do that. I've talked to Ford about this, and they've left the door open to them sending out an OTA update and increasing that charging power and allowing Lightning owners to get to 90% a little bit quicker. Listen, if this is your first time here, please don't forget, click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming Ford F-150 Lightning and other electric vehicle news and reviews here on State of Charge. And as always, thanks for watching.